All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's hybrid program, History at High Noon, Hidden Beneath Their Waves, with WRAL's Hidden History historian, Heather Leah. A few housekeeping notes for today. We ask that you please hold your questions until the end of the talk. Once Heather's done speaking, myself and our adult programs intern, Hannah, will ask her as many of your questions as time allows. Those from audience members here in person, as well as from folks that are joining us over Zoom. All right, so it's my honor to introduce and welcome our speaker. Heather Leah is a fifth-generation Raleighite and professional historian who explores history that's often not found in mainstream books. For nearly a decade of uncovering hidden history, she's dug through the state archives, explored underground tunnels and secret places, interviewed longtime Raleigheites for oral histories, and brought the photos and stories to viewers as an award-winning multi-platform producer at WRAL. So Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, hi there, everyone. Yep, I'm Heather. It's good to see everyone today, and hi there to everyone who's watching virtually as well. Just a quick preface before we start. With only an hour, I mean, each one of these lakes could have its own hour-long talk. I mean, each one of these lakes could have its own 5-hour-long talk. So we can't dig too deeply into each of these ghost towns or each of these locations. This is more of a survey of the history. Most of these lakes actually has its own story on WRAL currently. So if you want to know more about any one particular community, you can come get with me afterwards and I can show you where you can find that information. And then each of those stories has even more links to more detailed history that I can just put online. So with that started and that said, first of all, I'd love to know, and you can respond on Zoom as well, just you can put like a thumbs up or say me. How many people here were already aware that many of the lakes in North Carolina have ghost towns underneath them or remnants of history underneath hiding? So you got like maybe half, a little over half. I was really surprised as someone who grew up in Raleigh to find out that Jordan Lake had communities underneath it and that there was once thriving farmland and villages and towns and entire places that were underneath where the lake is today. Absolutely floored. I'd been to Jordan Lake so many times. I'd gone on boats, I'd gone fishing, and I just couldn't believe that it was covering all these secrets. So at the time, I thought it was the only one. And then I kind of went digging and found out actually a lot of our lakes have a similar story. And to start with, this is the outline of Jordan Lake. This is actually, I find this pretty interesting. When you look on Google Earth or Google Maps from the satellite, you can really kind of see how much space these lakes are really covering, right? That's a lot of history, a lot of space that could have had people living there. In fact, some of the places that used to be here in this area are now completely underwater. There was a Pea Ridge community, Seaforth. There was a place called Friendship, which a lot of Friendship is still there, but some has been put beneath the lake or messed up by the fact that the flooding happened there. Let me know if this cuts out. I feel like it's half and half. So if you have any trouble hearing me, let me know. So this is Jordan Lake, but it covers a lot of space. I want to mention that Jordan Lake, going back to before European settlers arrived, this was the New Hope Valley. The New Hope Valley was a place where a lot of Tuscarora lived. That was kind of the tribe that lived mostly in that area. A lot of the area that's today Cary originally had Tuscarora there. When European settlers started coming in from the coast, they actually had a lot of trouble getting past this part of North Carolina because the valley was so deep and so difficult to cross that they normally either had to go to the north and go way out of their way this way, or they had to go to the south and go way out of their way this way. And so in general, because of the New Hope Valley, which is now Jordan Lake, and again, this is why it flooded so easily, right? It was a valley. European settlers really kind of stayed to one side of the lake. They either came in from the coast and settled on that side, or they came down the Great Wagon Road, which was coming from up north, and they would come down and be in more western North Carolina. And so for a while, if you wonder why Raleigh didn't exist for a long time, but we still had a lot of other places that were popping up, this is part of the reason, people were having trouble getting to that part of the land. Well, a really unfortunate farmer inherited land on both sides of the valley. And he was like, what in the world can I do with this, right? Because you could not easily cross it, and no one had bothered to build a bridge because that would have been expensive, and why would you bother to do that, right? So he inherits it on both sides. So he's the first person in history that really had a reason to go ahead and put the money into building that bridge. Well, it turned out to be a fantastic inheritance because when he built that bridge, everyone wanted to use it. And so he charged a toll to cross the bridge. Everyone was willing to pay the toll. And then he actually built a tavern on the other side of the bridge. So not only could you cross the bridge if you were coming in from the east, but you could sleep over at his tavern and get a drink. It was called Seipert's Tavern. So if you're familiar with like Isaac Hunter's Tavern and the important role that that played in the founding of Raleigh, Seipert's Tavern was actually pretty important as well. It's beneath the lake, of course, now. All right, so here's some pictures from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Eventually, so the problem with the New Hope Valley is that it did flood a lot. Now, it made the land really, really fertile. So there were a lot of farmers that wanted to build their homes there because they were going to make, they'd have better time, growing their crops in that really fertile soil. But if a hurricane came through or a bad rain, it would flood again and again, and it got expensive. Now, there's a lot of reasons. Most of these lakes are formed with lots of political back and forth. Some people don't want the lake formed, others do. But ultimately, they did decide that they were going to, build a dam, flood the lake, and make Jordan Lake. That's a very condensed version of what happened there. But here are some pictures to kind of give you an idea of what it looked like as they were creating the lake. And here is more of an early picture of the lake. I think like the 1970s, possibly 80s. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sent me these. And then here's what it looks like today. This is one of the places on the lake. So a lot of people ask, what's under the lake right now? Are there actual houses down there? Are there buildings down there? For the most part, my understanding is no. Most of those places were torn down. The land was sold by the farmers to the government. And this is, some people were willing to sell, others didn't really want to sell. There was a lot of debate, but ultimately the land was sold. A lot of these houses were torn down, but there's still a lot of abandoned houses around the lake. If you ever go driving through like Bonsall or Friendship, you'll see just abandoned houses on the side of the road. And a lot of that is dating back to when these people all had to sell their land to let the lake flood. They kind of left and didn't come back. And so you'll still see kind of remnants of that out there. But there are roads that go under the lake. Obviously, the lake flooded a lot of the main roads, and there's a railroad track that goes under there, I believe. So this is one of the roads that I walked out on, and you can see it goes out into the lake, and it's just abandoned and overgrown, but you can actually walk on the road pretty far out into the lake. And this is the road from above. I love Google Satellite View. Lets me see a lot of things I can't normally see. Here's the road. You can actually drive down it to a certain point, but then you have to park, and then it takes you all the way out to here. Here's how far into the lake it goes. This is where it would have continued, and then you can actually see it does continue on the other side of the road. So I found some headlines from when they decided to make Jordan Lake. And again, this was a discussion that took quite some time. New Hope Valley families take dim view of moving. And then here's a picture from that area, one of the kind of abandoned homes or farms that I've told you about. And this was in, looks like 1964, News and Observer, 1964. So you can see not everybody was really happy to move. And I definitely got some emails after my story came out with people letting me know that they were mad about having to move. They didn't like it. And there were some discussions about why. Here's a person that said, I may be defeated, but I'm still fighting to preserve what our parents and grandparents left us in New Hope Valley, fighting to preserve their last resting place. Whatever happens, may some way be found to let those 2,000 people residing in New Hope Valley live on in peace, keeping their homes and other properties, leaving the churches to stand and the bones of our dead to lie unmolested. So that does give you a sense of some of the strong feelings about what they felt like they were being forced out of their homes. And many of these families had lived there for generations. So this wasn't something that was taken very lightly. Here's another person who wrote, first, 15 cemeteries lie within the proposed dam. I feel that the living ought to be able to manage their affairs without disturbing the dead. When a grave is moved, something is destroyed that cannot be brought back. Now, if you talk to government officials, the ones I've spoken with say that there aren't any graves beneath the lake. I have, however, talked to some family members who will disagree with that. They've said that not everybody was able to afford to move a loved one. Not every grave was marked or known. There were plenty of unmarked graves. I mean, these were farmers that had lived there since the 1700s. Not to mention the graves of potential people who had lived there before that and where they were buried. So it is pretty likely that there are some graves underneath the lake. This was an interesting point as well. Here in New Hope Valley, it's entirely different. The land within the dam may be worth more than all the benefits to be derived from the dam. This property in New Hope Valley is wonderfully located in a triangle of rapidly growing towns and cities, Chapel Hill, Durham, and Raleigh. And this property is destined to become very valuable. No, right? I venture to say that within 20 years, much of this property would be worth to its owners from 1,000 to 10,000 an acre. I bet possibly more, with a total value of 60 million. This is entirely too valuable a piece of property to be destroyed by the water of any dam. I am in no way trying to be political, just to tell you the history. The families lost out on some money, right? On what this land would have been worth. I do not think they got paid enough to make up for what this property is worth today. And neither do many of them. This is New Hope Valley Railway. The New Hope Valley Railroad has long since stopped making commercial runs. Small settlements were flooded over to create Jordan Lake, and the route of the original tracks is now part of the American Tobacco Trail. So this is actually a place where you can go today because this organization bought a chunk of railroad. You can actually go and visit that section of railroad that still exists, that used to run through that area, and that kind of made those little towns run. And this museum, if you haven't been, it's really cool. There's a lot of old trains there, and you can walk through them. And unfortunately, the gentleman who was the director, he passed away, I believe it was this year. But he was so knowledgeable about this history, and he told me a lot of the history. All right, Falls Lake. I'm going to try to go quick because we only have an hour, and I'm not known for being able to slow down my talking. And Falls Lake. Does anybody know what main community Falls Lake covered up? There's kind of a big one that people may remember. If you don't know, that's fine. I'm just curious. Does anyone know? Has anyone heard of, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, please forgive me, the Hurricane? The Hurricane or the Hurricane? All right, well, we're going to learn about it today. And if on chat you're saying you know, awesome. All right, this is Falls Lake. Again, I wanted to show you an overview of it because it lets you really get a sense of how much land it's covering up. I was surprised, again, pretty much any hidden history I do, you can just guess that I was surprised when I found out. I got excited and wrote about it. There is an abandoned highway that just runs right through the Falls Lake hiking area. And it's a pretty good stretch of highway, maybe like a mile, and it's totally overgrown. You'll see a picture of it in a minute. The first thing that caught my eye was this abandoned stretch of highway that's just overgrown in the middle of some hiking trails. So I wanted to know, where did this highway come from? Why is it there? Oh man, there's stuff under Falls Lake too. So here is a picture from the Army Corps of Engineers showing they actually were trying to construct the dam, but they found another dam underneath it. That totally makes sense because a lot of places where you find like an old mill or an old dam, well, that space is perfect for an old mill, and therefore there were always mills there pretty much as long as settlers were here. So it's not shocking to me that they would find a dam under a place where they want to put a dam, because it's a great spot for a dam and everyone always knew it for hundreds of years. So that's what they're doing there. This, anybody know what this is? Moonshine. Why do you know what that is? This is moonshine. This is a picture that was sent to me by a gentleman who used to bust the moonshiners in the Hurricane. I'm going to call it the Hurricane. I've heard it pronounced hurricane. It's not hurricane. It's the Hurricane or the Hurricane. However, it is called that because I've heard, again, this place is full of myth and legend, and you'll see as we get closer. But one of the legends I've heard about it is it's literally called that because of a hurricane that came through at one point. It was so like extremely well known and really moved the people there that they started calling it that. But anyway, the area was really known for its moonshine. It was a part of Wake County, Durham County, some of the surrounding counties. It's not any one particular place, and you never know exactly where it is because if you ask where the Hurricane is, it's always 5 miles down yonder. And you'll never really know because no one wanted to tell you. And we're going to talk about that. But a lot of people who I know who remember it were living here in maybe the 60s and 70s. However, it's been here much longer. I believe it goes back to the early 1900s, possibly late 1800s. Hard to find history around it because it's always 5 miles down yonder and we don't know who lives there. We don't know which direction it is. But what I do know is it's been called a place where it's very rural. There's red clay. A lot of the people who live there are working farms, but there's also a lot of people living there who are doing moonshining. And this is very common, and that's why these moonshine stills are out here. And if you know where to look, there are still moonshine stills out in the Falls Lake area. So if you're out there hiking and you run into a moonshine still, that's what you found. Here are pictures of it. This is sort of in the Wake Forest area, right? Think sort of north of Raleigh. I know that my dad would tell me that he would, if he drove north of Raleigh, you'd sort of hit that area. And when you hit there, you kind of knew to be careful because they would recognize that they don't recognize you. And they would kind of look at you funny, right? But here's what it looked like to give you an idea, right? Very rural. And when I'm saying it's this rural, we're not talking about 1800s or early 1900s. We're talking about the 60s and 70s. It's very rural, right? Raleigh is growing and kind of pushing into it. But here are some pictures. This is at a museum that's in Wake Forest that has the most hurricane history I've been able to find. The Durham Herald-Sun wrote I'm going to squint, I think that's 1941. People of the Hurricane are both happy and despondent, for shabby community near Durham is a land of paradox. It's a pretty good way to describe it. I haven't seen it, so when I say it's a good way to describe it, based on what I've read. Here's another picture that I thought went well with this description. The clay-reddened land falls sharply away from paved roadways down valleys shaped by the timeless flow of the Neuse River and a half dozen tributaries. Though only 15 miles north of downtown Raleigh, the land is more akin to the Blue Ridge Mountains, 150 miles to the west, than the coastal plains of eastern North Carolina. So think Appalachia. It is the Hurricane, a land that progress bypassed until mid-century, where dirt-poor fields forced farmers to turn to moonshining, and bootleggers and revenuers were almost friendly competitors in a white lightning war. It is a land losing much of its historic character as its sons and daughters move from the farm to the city, and the city moves towards the Hurricane. The Hurricane was named for a series of severe windstorms, I was right, that struck in the 19th century. Soon it will feel the shock of another force as much as its southernmost territory will be inundated by the Falls Lake, to be completed in the early 1980s. Roughly, the Hurricane lies north of the Neuse River and west of Wake Forest, extending through the New Light Township and Stony Hill Fire District in Wake County. That was pretty much the best description I'd seen. All right, and here we go, some more pictures. This is an actual picture, again, of moonshine being found by the gentleman who was kind enough to share that with me, and he does have a book. If you look at the article that I did for WRAL, it does have a link to his book if this is really fascinating to you. No one knows, or else won't tell, the hurricane's exact boundaries. You never get to the hurricane, said Sanford Murray, who runs a store on NC 98 just north of the Neuse. It's always 5 miles down the road. Here's some pictures. I believe that this is them maybe dumping out the moonshine that they found and not drinking it. But this gives you some visuals. So that is the history that we lost. And we talk about a rich culture. I mean, we're talking about a culture that's almost like Appalachia, but right here in the triangle. It's been pretty much completely erased by Falls Lake. To my knowledge, there's nothing left. There could be something 5 miles down the road, though I don't know. This is the highway. I believe this is old 98. So there's new 98, and then this is old 98. And this, kind of like the picture for Jordan Lake, this one goes out into Falls Lake. And it extends, this one extends further though. The one at Jordan Lake, you can actually drive on it until a certain point. This one is in the woods. You can't drive on this, right? You have to hike up into the woods and then find it. If you stumble upon it, you can walk on it. But you can walk on it for a good mile or so. There I am. This is a picture of me taking a picture. That's Falls Lake. And there's the kind of it going into the lake. So I wanted to show you this kind of real world area that was originally part of that space, but of course is now abandoned and in the woods, pretty much forgotten. Okay, I thought I had another picture, but I guess not. All right, Lake Norman. This lake is closer to Charlotte, but look how huge it is. Look at this, it's huge. This lake has so much hidden underneath it. So I wanted to again show you the outlines and all of the little areas where it goes out to the world. It's just covering tons of hidden history underneath Lake Norman. Oh, that's a very blurry photo, but it's the best they had. A photo of, I believe that's the dam or possibly them creating it. Progress to wash Long Island into Lake Norman. Okay, so what is under Lake Norman? Not Long Island, New York, not Long Island, New York. This lake covers a lot of history. There's a whole story online, and I can't even go into everything. But there's a camp that's under there that was like a really prominent, like a church camp where people would gather, and that's under there now. There's a Revolutionary War battlefield that's under Lake Norman, and a ton of research has been done on where the marching lines were and where they went through what's currently Lake Norman. There's also a mill village under there, pretty common with some of these lakes, right? One thing you'll notice these lakes tend to have in common is the people who did live there were often farmers or part of a mill village and didn't necessarily have the money or resources to push back or protect their land. And you'll notice that happening again and again. So Long Island was the mill village, one of the mill villages, and there were a lot. There's no way to go into everything with Lake Norman. There's also an airplane under there, which we'll look at. And then we won't talk about this today, but within the past year or two, they found a car under there that had a woman in there that had been missing for 15 years. So this lake hides quite a lot. And then there's also, there's one more thing. Oh, a monster, like a Loch Ness monster. So historically accurate, okay? Another picture. I like to find newspapers from the era so you can hear more than just me talking about what I've learned about it, but actually see what people of that time period thought and felt. This was progress. Now the site has turned back into a wilderness. Only ugly scars in the dark. Red clay mark the site where Long Island Mill once stood, and where several generations of Long Islanders toiled at spinning frames, cards, and pickers. The houses and people are gone, and so is the company store. Jagged and broken cement marks the place where walkways and streets ran. Soon, the waters of the Catawba will cover it all, and Long Island will become part of Lake Norman. So there were very real people who watched their homes and their place of work just go up under the water. Now, here's what I've heard. I have not seen with my own eyes, but I have heard that some of these buildings are still actually under there. Not everything was torn down. They're not specifically the mill, that there are apparently buildings still standing beneath Lake Norman. That's different than Jordan Lake and Falls Lake, where the buildings were pretty much torn down. What's under the lake would be mostly roads that weren't torn up, or railroads. This, I believe, has a bridge underneath the water, as well as parts of a church and some other things. And this is what I've been told by various people who live in the area, that when they lower the water levels, you can see some of this. This is a lot, so I'm going to go through it quickly. This is an actual photo of the monster that lives in Lake Norman. I took this picture. No, that's not true. That's a stock image, because there's not a picture of the monster that lives in Lake Norman, or else it would be fact and not fiction. However, it's worth mentioning because it's become a huge part of Lake Norman's culture. They call their monster Normie. So North Carolina is interesting to me because North Carolina is more than its history. It's its culture and its stories, right? And so I do like stories about the Loch Ness Monster, or what's the other one? The big hairy gorilla one. What's his name? Bigfoot. Bigfoot. There's a legend about mermaids that goes back to the 1700s, and Revolutionary War soldiers said that they saw mermaids sitting on the banks of the Cape Fear River. There's a lot of these sort of more magical legends that go back quite a ways and have roots in the culture and the stories that we tell ourselves. With Lake Norman, they really embrace the monster beneath the lake, and it kind of makes it so that North Carolina has our very own Loch Ness Monster. Now, what is the monster really? Oh, in fact, a Japanese TV show came and filmed at Lake Norman trying to find the Lake Norman Monster. I do know that tours that go out on the lake tend to talk about the Lake Norman Monster, Normie, and I believe there's even like a Lake Norman Monster sighting website. The kids, I think I have it. The kids describe the monster. He was orange. Mallory, 6, of North Charlotte, told me moments after the sighting. He looked like he was going to play with the osprey. Another one said he was green and purple. A 3-year-old, probably less trustworthy than the 6-year-old. And he was swimming with the ducks. And then Michael, 10, said he saw Normie further away near the dam, and he looked like a big blob. Weird. I'm going to get a sip. Give me a second. Sorry. I included this picture. And again, this is just a stock photo because we don't have any actual photos of the monster. But many people believe what it could be that people are saying that they're seeing over and over again is basically a really big catfish, which is possible, right? Because this is a really big lake. This is something I only vaguely have heard about, that there may have been some sort of like chemicals or something that went into the water and it made the fish weird. So there's a lot of these legends around it, but it's actually become quite an important part of this place's culture. All right. And again, Lake Norman, there's so much more to it. We just don't have time to even go into it, but there's a whole story about it on my Hidden History segment, and many places I link to where you can research more. Does anybody know what this is? Can you tell? It's up here. It's the airplane. Yep, it's the airplane. So, a decade after the creation of Lake Norman, a plane sank. It was the summer of 1974. The plane wasn't discovered until 2013. And the Charlotte Fire Department said a dive team was doing practice drills, and they noticed the plane with their sonar equipment. It's about 90 feet below the surface. You can't see it from the top, but it is under there. And one family said the plane could be theirs. They believe that it might be their own family plane because they have a tale of their own plane sinking in the 1970s on Lake Norman. So it's possible that we have found the owners of this plane. But it just goes to show you that other than mill towns and ghost towns, there are other interesting tidbits of history just hidden beneath these lakes that you're going over on boat or swimming or fishing by all the time. And on that same note, I didn't want to do a whole section on Carr Lake. How many of you have already heard about the train beneath Carr Lake? Pretty popular. Wow, no. Oh man, okay. So I thought this was a pretty well-known one. So, long before Carr Lake was created in 1952, there was a tall railroad trestle that ran across the body of water that had been there previously, and it was called Nutbrush Creek. And then in 1918, so we're talking a long time ago, engine number 2 tried to cross the trestle, but had been weakened by a forest fire, and it collapsed and it dropped this engine into the creek. And now under Carr Lake, if you're out there swimming in Carr Lake, there is a train underneath you, the tender and 3 cars. I mean, it's a lot of the train is just under this lake. These 2 people, I believe it's probably these 2 guys here, but 2 brothers died in that accident. So it's more than just ghost towns. There's a lot of stuff beneath these lakes. Roanoke Rapids Lake. I know some people who are waiting to hear this one. All right, so I want to give you a caveat to the Roanoke Rapids Lake. Most of these lakes I had already written about a lot before coming here today and doing this presentation. So I was pretty familiar and could really easily off the cuff talk about that history. I learned about this one maybe a week ago. And it has such a cool history. I definitely wanted to include it, but this is not history I'm as deeply familiar with, but I wanted to share it because it's fascinating. And if you want to know more of the history about this particular lake and what's underneath it, we have a group right here at the front who they can tell you more about that history. All right, but I'm gonna do my best. Rock Landing. So this is a map, obviously. Here's Weldon, Rock Landing, and the Roanoke Canal would have run in this area. It's now underwater, but Rock Landing was not a little mill town or a little area with lots of farmers. Rock Landing was meant to be the next New York, the next Philadelphia. This was a big time metropolitan town, or it was supposed to be. It was sort of a canal boom town, right? So the Roanoke Canal, which was a really big deal at the time, they didn't have cars yet or airplanes. They just had the Roanoke Canal, and that was a really big deal. So this town, Rock Landing, had a tavern. It had at least one hotel. It was a big deal. Well, and we have here, someone from New York City who's down there buying stuff down there. I mean, this is really meant to be a prominent place, and they were selling lots of plots of land as people were coming down to live there because it was a hot place to live. It's a hot place to grow, especially if you're working on the canal. This would have been a very prominent area. Okay. And here is just a mention of Rock Landing. Now, I will tell you, Rock Landing is not a place that I had heard about prior to researching this. And you would wonder, like, what happened to Rock Landing? If it was supposed to be this metropolitan next New York, next Philly, I do understand how a mill town gets flooded. I do understand how, a bunch of farms get flooded and how they decide to do that. But why would you flood Rock Landing? Well, Rock Landing was a canal boom town, and when the train tracks came through, the canal sort of became obsolete. And apparently the train tracks just kind of skipped Rock Landing altogether to make it even worse. So Rock Landing became it didn't reach the vision it was supposed to reach. However, it's got a very important history. So parts of the Roanoke Canal are still under the lake. Now, the Roanoke Canal is considered a site on the Underground Railroad network to freedom. It's officially recognized by the National Park Service. In fact, in Halifax, there are multiple sites, and this is in Halifax. There are multiple sites that are part of the Underground Railroad, officially confirmed. Rock Landing is not officially confirmed on that registry, but historians have confirmed that it was part of the Underground Railroad. It was used in part of the Underground Railroad capacity. And particularly, there was a woman who went to live there, and her name was Patsy Young. Now, Patsy Young, when she was enslaved in Franklin County on Nathaniel Hunt's plantation, she tried to escape. Well, she escaped twice. Once she got brought back. The second time she made it. Now, she is a mother with a 4-year-old daughter. And I will tell you, from the research I've done on the Underground Railroad, which is a whole other huge passion project of mine, and could be a presentation too, it was risky. It was very risky to try and escape on the Underground Railroad. The historians that I've spoken with who are experts on this, they tell me there were many people who didn't try to make the journey because it was dangerous. People thought they may not be physically capable enough to survive that kind of journey, crossing over deadly rivers. The Roanoke River literally was a place where you could die trying to cross the Roanoke River, which again is one of those freedom roads that was a very prominent way for people to escape. People also wouldn't make the trip because they didn't want to leave family. They also wouldn't make the trip because they didn't know how they would survive financially in the world. But Patsy Young tried to escape at 16. She did get recaptured, but she did escape again. And she knew how she would make her living because her enslaver was making a lot of money on her because she was such a well-known brewer. She brewed just the best ale. And people would come to his plantation to drink that ale. And he was making so much money on her ale. And she cooked such good cakes. And she was an excellent seamstress who made these beautiful clothes for men and women for fancy parties. So she knew she could make a lot of money if she could get free. She had her livelihood and her daughter's livelihood set. So researchers have discovered that when she escaped, one of the places she went, she did go to Halifax County, which Halifax County, again, lots of sites that are known to have been part of the Underground Railroad. And that's partially because there was a large population of people who were Black and so they were sympathetic. There were also a lot of abolitionists there who wanted to help. And then there was the Roanoke River and places where you could more easily escape. Well, Rock Landing is where she landed. And according to slave ads of the era, there were at least 5 other people who did escape and went to Rock Landing. So we know that Rock Landing was a place where people would use as kind of a series of events as they went out on the Underground Railroad. Well, she lived there for probably about 2 years. The ads that we have tell us that she was there 2 summers. And she made a lot of money there, at least as far as we can tell, feeding the Roanoke Canal workers and making that ale. And again, we have pieces of the Roanoke Canal. A lot of it's still underwater, but there's actually a Roanoke Canal trail and museum where you can see part of the Roanoke Canal that's still above the ground today. And you can actually see like the locks and things like that that were parts of the canal. So if you're interested in that history, there's a lot of that in Halifax. There's also a 200-year-old like stone culvert, like an aqueduct almost. And that was built using enslaved labor. And that was also then later used to help people escape slavery. So very interesting history out there. Here's the culvert or the aqueduct, right? Again, built using enslaved labor right by the Roanoke Canal and later used to help people escape. So here are some of the ads. We have this one here. Reward is $75, paid for apprehending and delivering to me at Weldon, also very nearby to the canal, Daniel, and $25 for, it looks like, Ben, and Harry is also in there. They belong to the Roanoke Navigation Company and are probably in the neighborhood of Rock Landing. So here we go. You can see Rock Landing, and this is just one of the examples of how we know that Rock Landing was used in this way. And then this one here is very, very long, and I don't want to read you the whole thing, but this is Patsy Young's one of the runaway ads. Interestingly enough, because her enslaver was so passionate about getting her back, and a lot of that was, I think, because of the money he was making, and now in his mind losing, because he kept putting out so many ads, we know a lot more about her life than we do about other people who were enslaved. And that's a whole other very sad story about when people were enslaved. It's very hard to go back and find your ancestry information. There wasn't a lot of documented details. But she is kind of a rare case because we have this information. So we can see Patsy Young, she's a runaway. They talk about how she'd ran away before. She spent part of the time she was runaway in the neighborhood and in the town of Halifax, 1 or 2 summers at Rock Landing. And he's informed that she cooked for the hands employed by the canal. She also spent some time in Plymouth. And at the above places, she has many acquaintances. So what we're hearing, this is how I would interpret this. She's made a lot of friends, and he's really afraid she's going to get away because a lot of people would be willing to help her out, right? And part of it is because she's becoming very well known for her very delicious food and her very delicious ale. Oh, that's it.
I'm Patsy Young. I left Master Hunt's plantation and heard about free people of color able to work on the Roanoke Canal, and I wanted that job. I was tired of working for Master Hunt, making dresses for big parties and men's suits and cooking cakes and baking cakes and pies, and they just loved my cakes and pies and my ale. They drank a lot of my ale, and Hunt made so much money off of me. I went on and got me a job on the Roanoke Canal. Took Eliza with me, and I met Ezra Johnson, who helped me brew that ale for Mr. Tillery and Mr. Cotton in Tillery, North Carolina, and in Scotland Neck, in a big barn. We made lots of ale. I made lots of money cooking dinners and lunches for the men that worked on the Roanoke Canal. Now, I heard they had an advertisement out for me. And Israel, well, he was a boatsman, and he knew the ways of the rivers. So we decided we were going to get away before Master Hunt came back to get me. So we got on that boat early one morning, Eliza and I, and Israel. And we rode that. Got to keep on keeping on, my Lord. I got to keep on keeping on. Oh, keep on keeping on. Freedom, oh freedom, freedom over me. And before I be your slave, I be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. We found Freedom Land.
That is a storyteller who I think tells the story better than I can. And that's an interpretation of Patsy Young. I wasn't going to point her out. She's right here. I didn't want to embarrass her too much, but this is her. She's the first one who introduced me to the story of Patsy Young, and it did stick with me. But she's just one story of so many who would escape across the Roanoke River, one of those freedom roads. And that's, again, there's a lot to talk about with the Underground Railroad. I've done a series on that, a lot of passion there. But this is one of those places. And she brought her 4-year-old daughter Eliza with her and made a livelihood, made a living for her and her family. Her memory is so strongly connected that even today, people know who she is. The Smithsonian just did a whole thing on Patsy Young. And if I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong over here, there is a brewer who is working on maybe trying to recreate her ale. What's the name of your brewing company? Harlem Brewing Company in Rocky Mount. And this woman here, if I understand, you are the first African American woman brewer that's officially recognized. Well, I guess on the more that's amazing. That's amazing. And her roots are here just like Patsy's. And you're right, Patsy probably beat you to it, but she probably wasn't commercially recognized either. So there's some stuff going on there as well. Patsy Young's story is really getting told a lot more. As it should be. But Rock Landing, when I found out that there was not only an abandoned town under a lake, which we've been talking about, but that one of them was part of the Underground Railroad and it's still under a lake, I felt like that was worth talking about. All right, this is very brief and then we're almost done. Bellevue's Lake in Little Egypt. I don't have much to say about this, but I really wanted to include it because every time I do a story about underwater ghost towns, this gets brought up to me. Someone will email me about it. And I've done research and I can't find much on it. So if anybody knows anything, please let me know in the comments as well. Those of you who are watching virtually, I didn't want to just not mention it. Bellevue's Lake apparently has a community underneath it that was referred to as Little Egypt. And apparently this was a predominantly Black community, historically Black community. And so there's a lot of pain and anguish that comes with that because their community was destroyed and lost and flooded. And I do want to mention, while many of the communities I've been talking about were more mill communities, farmer communities, in a lot of the research I've done on historically Black communities, many of them were forcibly built in flood zones where they are constantly, even today, dealing with floods and damage and things like that. And it would not be shocking if many of these historically Black communities were washed away, right? Because they were purposely put into flood zones. They're just not under lakes. So that's why they're not part of this particular presentation. But this is one that I believe is under a lake, but I'm not able to find many details, but I didn't want to just not mention it. All right, Fontana Lake. This is the last one. I think this one is really interesting and cool though. Fontana Lake is in the mountains. I first learned about it because of the Road to Nowhere. Has anybody here heard of the Road to Nowhere? There are a few, okay, a few. You can say in the comments if you have to, let us know. You can see again kind of how long this lake stretches, and you can imagine how many of these little Appalachian mill villages were just swallowed up when this lake was created. Here's one of those villages. It's my understanding that this is part of Judson. Now, Fontana Lake has buildings still beneath it. This one I know for sure. I've been told by several people who live up there, including people who work up there, when they lower the water every so often, you can actually see the buildings under it. I want to go very badly and see the buildings under it. So this is a picture of Judson, another picture of the homes that were in Judson. Judson was not the only community to go beneath the lake. It's just the one I know most about. But there were lots of these mill communities up there in the mountains that were just swallowed up by the lake. And then here is the Road to Nowhere. Probably recognize this one. This was the picture I think they used for my flyer. There's light, but no roadway at the end of this tunnel on the Road to Nowhere in Swain County. It's part of a promised highway that was never completed. So the reason they created this dam was back in the 1940s during World War II, they needed more hydroelectric power in order to use it for the war efforts. My understanding is that one main thing they used that for was to create the nuclear bombs that they ended up dropping on Japan. So they go to Swain County, North Carolina, And they're like, we want to build a dam here, but it's going to flood a lot of your little mill towns. We'll buy up your land from you. And this is again similar to when we talked about Jordan Lake. It wasn't popular. Not a lot of people wanted to necessarily sell their land, but they really did want to help with the war effort, right? It was World War II. So there was an element of guilt there of we need to help America fight Germany, right? So obviously it did happen. But one of the things the people who lived in these towns, and we'll talk about Judson specifically, they just asked the government, when you flood our land, you're going to flood our highways, and it's hard to get around because it's mountains. Can you just build us a highway so that we can get back to our ancestral home? Because many of these people have been here for generations, and they had loved ones buried out there on those farms. There's cemeteries that are now just out there in the woods abandoned, and you can't get to them. If you can imagine, I know for me, my grandmother is buried in Oakwood Cemetery. Anytime I want to, I can go visit her. And I do take that for granted, right? I remember when my grandfather died, my grandma went and visited him every single holiday. It's Easter. No, we're not doing Easter egg hunt. First, we're going to go visit grandpa. It's it's grandpa's birthday. We're not going to have cake. We're going to go visit grandpa. It's Christmas. We're going to go visit grandpa. We always visited grandpa first. These people, they can't go visit grandpa. They can't go visit grandma because their loved ones are buried in the middle of the woods in the mountains. They can't even care for their graves or attend to them or make sure they're not overgrown or broken. They can't go put flowers on them because the highway that was supposed to take them back to those areas didn't get finished. The government built about 7 miles of highway and then ended it with this tunnel. And then it just stops. If you walk through the tunnel, it just stops at some woods. And if it went another 30 miles, it would get to where they needed to be to see their homeland. Out in those woods, there are cemeteries, there are individual graves, there's a school out there, there are homes out there, because not everything got flooded. Some of the stuff is just on the edge of the lake, or kind of like Jordan Lake, where there's abandoned buildings within a few miles of the lake because they still sold their land, right? A lot of these people cannot get back to even buildings that they're still there. But particularly, I think getting back to their loved ones' graves is kind of a sticking point. So they put up at some point this sign, "Welcome to Road to Nowhere, a broken promise." 1943 to question mark? When will the promise be redeemed? We're not sure. The 7-mile-long dead-end road to nowhere in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park could go further into the park, up to 27 more miles. I actually think it's 30, but it's a road that park officials didn't want, and environmentalists oppose it, and Swain County has sought it for 61 years. It's a complicated question, right? This road could mess with the wildlife that live in the Great Smoky Mountains, right? Obviously, it will be expensive to create. Where will that money come from? But at the same time, we have people who can't go visit their loved ones, their childhood home, their childhood, stomping grounds, anything like that. Here's a picture of it. I went and visited it maybe 2 years ago. Here's a picture of Fontana, Lake Fontana from above. You can see it when you're driving down towards the road to nowhere. So you can look down there and see, here's the lake that's covering up some of their village, some of their towns. And that is pretty much it. I can't believe I did it in under an hour. So good job, me. And thank you all for being here.
Okay, hello, I'm Hannah. I'm the intern. If you have questions, please raise your hand and I will bring you the mic.
Hi, my name is Stephen Green. I'm a local historian and genealogist in Halifax County. I've worked with Heather on several projects on the Underground Railroad. I heard of her presentation here on underground towns and lakes, and I reached out to her and asked her if she would kindly consider and this has just been in the works in the last couple of weeks. I want to commend her on an excellent presentation today, and especially her last minute piecemealing her some of my research, and so we appreciate that. My question to you is, you are considering doing a story on WRAL that will go a little bit more specific about our research in Halifax County. Can you tell us when that might air, or some more information on that? Thank you.
Hello. All right, it's working again. Okay. All right. So this is a great question. So, and I'm going to segue that into a few things. All of these, except for Belleuse, which is Little Egypt, that one doesn't have a story yet. And then, but all the rest have a story on WRAL currently. So if you go to WRAL and you search hidden history, you'll get a very long list of all of my hidden history I've ever done, and you will have to look for it through there. Or you can just Google like WRAL Jordan Lake, WRAL Falls Lake. I think it would probably come up if you do that. And I do have business cards if you want that information too. But anyways, all of these do have a story with a lot more detail and pictures and things like that because I didn't have a time limit. And I do try to link to other resources. So if you're really interested in any of these in particular, you can find that story online and even link to other places where you can start that research. You're also welcome to take one of my cards and ask me questions. As far as the one for Roanoke Rapids Lake, which is on Rock Landing, that's the one that's related to the Underground Railroad. That story is published. I'm adding some edits to it when I get home to make sure it's completely accurate. But that is online. So you should be able to find it if you go looking for it. But as far as when it will be on the actual homepage of WRAL, we are looking at either tomorrow or Friday, depending on breaking news. I think it'll be Friday though. So look for that on Friday, and we are trying to air it on television as well. So I would say Friday is your safest bet, and it will be our weekend story. So.
Okay, any other questions?
Sure.
All right. One of the questions we have is, do you know if they're allowing any sort of archaeological investigations as part of any of these lakes that you mentioned?
Just if any of you are needing to leave and don't want to wait for the Zoom stuff, just so that you know, if you want to have some of my cards, I have a few here. So feel free to come get those if you need to leave, no worries. That is such a great question. And the answer, I have to say, sadly, is no. In fact, in Raleigh, and this is unrelated to the lakes, but I think that it's a pretty prominent piece of history, and we're not even getting to do any archaeological digs on that. There used to be a wall that went all the way around downtown Raleigh, and it was built for the Civil War to protect Raleigh from nothing. But but that's what it was there for. And that wall was built using enslaved labor, and Union troops camped outside it. We have proof of that. There is very likely, if we could do an archaeological dig, you would very likely find Civil War artifacts, a whole debris field from the troops who either camped outside it, who were Union, or even the Confederate troops who manned the wall. And even more importantly, probably artifacts from the enslaved community that built it. And they're building over that in so many places, and there's no archaeological digs being planned. I know that's not your question about the lakes, but that just goes to show how hard it is to get an archaeological dig approved. So the answer I have to say, sadly, is no, but maybe something over here about Rock Landing, I imagine.
Sorry, the people online can't hear if you don't have the mic.
This is about the Rock Landing one, I think. So there might be a different answer here.
Just wanted to add, and I sent some information to her. Maybe it'll be on the story. I do know for a fact that UNC, I believe it was UNC, did an extensive archaeological dig 1 year prior to the damming of the Roanoke River Dam. There were Native American artifacts, burial grounds, And all of that is documented, and people are still finding Native American artifacts. I have a collection that I also have. So that is available online, and there was a there was a survey done before it was dammed up.
There you go. And I can add, the stories, if you go to find each of them, most of these lakes do have some kind of museum attached to them in some capacity. So if you want to know about the hurricane, there's a museum that has that information, and they even have talks from people who either used to live there or their grandma used to live there. So if you're really interested in any of this particular history, I would definitely say go online. My story and other stories will tell you how to find those museums, and you can find whatever they've done, because they would have done so much more extensive research than I would be able to.
Awesome. Thank you. And so many messages in the chat just thanking you for such a wonderful presentation, Heather. Last question. Many folks are asking how you get to these sites. Are you allowed to just walk up to them and explore them on your own, or what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so Road to Nowhere, you can just visit it. It's really cool and I would recommend it. We went out to Road to Nowhere. You can just walk right up to it. You can walk through it. Some of the ghost towns that are around the Road to Nowhere, you can actually, I believe my article might have some links to this, but you can actually hike out if you're a really fit person who loves to hike, and find some of these ghost towns. They're out there in the woods off hiking trails. So when we're talking about Lake Fontana out there in the mountains, yes. Jordan Lake, the place that I went, you can hike out to it. There were people out there fishing and things like that. Falls Lake, the highway, the abandoned highway, you can hike to it. I believe I say how to get to it in one of my stories on it. So I do have, if I can give you my contact information, if anybody wants to email me specifically for like how to find some of these places, any that are open to the public, I'm happy to share that information of how to find them if you want to go see them for yourself. Yeah. I can give my email address, or if you guys want to put it in the chat.
Sure. And a follow-up question to that, folks are asking if you do private tours to any of these sites, or if you know of any groups that do.
If you have a group that really wants a tour, I would say you could either email me and maybe we could set something up. But I would think, I mean, that would be the best way. I can tell you how to find the sites that are open to the public. And then some of these places, like I said, there are museums attached to them. So I might recommend going to the museum and finding out from there. For example, if you're interested in Falls Lake and the hurricane, the museum that I linked to, it's in Wake Forest. In my story, they have talks, they have an archive. There's a lot of great stuff there. Road to Nowhere, they do a boat tour that'll take you out. It's not a tour, that's the wrong word. They take people once a year out to see the cemeteries, usually family members, but it's possible that if you were a historian or something, you could maybe go on that. And maybe something here related to Roanoke Rapids Lake that I don't know about.
Halifax County has a state historic site. It has one of the few trails that goes down to the Roanoke River that is designated, and as a state historic site. It touches on that. We also have a Roanoke Canal Museum that has many displays on it, and it is on the Roanoke Canal Trail, which is a 7-mile that goes to where it ends down into the river. And you can get all this information on our visitor center at Visit Halifax County, North Carolina.
Yeah, they have an underground railroad trail that goes down to the Roanoke River. There's a lot of lakes floating in my head. And I have been to that museum that talks about the canal, and it has the locks and like a big part of the canal that's still there. And then again, you can also see that aqueduct, which was really cool, and I went to see that as well.
Do we have any more questions from our in-person audience? All right. Well, Heather, thank you so much for taking your time.
There was one more,
today.
Stacy.
Oh, one more.
I just had a quick question. going through all this research, when you look back at it, how do you think that this also represents like the loss of history, the idea that water washes over communities, particularly minority communities that are kind of lost forever without an account and a record of that culture? How does this more a reflection of the way that we view history nationally when it's washed over or it's glossed over in material for timelines and dates and people, but not the culture and the reality of that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point. My segment on WRAL is literally called Hidden History, and a lot of that is because it's history that in some cases was actively hidden. I will tell you, when I started studying hidden history, like I said, I'm from Raleigh. I'm a 7th generation North Carolinian. So a lot of this history was stuff my family told me that you would never find in a history book, right? Or people that lived in Raleigh told me. And at first it was just cool history, right? Oh, that used to be a secret. That's a secret. That has a secret underground place that you didn't know was there, like a secret underground, what is it called? A speakeasy, right? Did you know that under there's a secret mall? There was one I did, that was quite popular was, one of my first big ones was there's a secret underground like mall slash music scene underneath what is now the Village District, right? And I thought that was so cool and I didn't know. But as I dug into this history, I realized it's not just cool lost history. A lot of it is history of marginalized communities because the history that isn't told, the history that is actively hidden, is the history that the people are ashamed to tell or they don't want people to know. We have an entire community in Raleigh, for example, Oberlin Village, which is one of the largest freedmen's villages in the state, definitely the largest in Raleigh. And for most of my life, I didn't even know it was there, because half of it was destroyed when Wade Avenue went through. So we build a major road through there and destroy half of this historically Black community that was literally built by people who were freed from slavery on that very land. And then they're freed from slavery, they build their own village, it thrives, and then the city turns around, tears down half of that history while it's still thriving, and then builds over top of it Cameron Village, and they rename it after the person who enslaved those people's families. Cameron, like Duncan Cameron was the guy who owned that plantation. That's just an example. A lot of these, again, marginalized communities, historically Black communities, were purposely put in places that flood. I did a story on Princeville, and we talked about with them back there, and we talked about you know, how this was also like I believe, if I remember correctly, it's been a while. It was like the first freedmen's community built in like the country, right? It's right here in North Carolina, and it's still struggling to keep its history alive. Am I accurate in that? And first incorporated, the first incorporated Black community in the country. 1885, and it's literally sitting in a flood zone and they can't get their head above water, and that's not meant to be a pun. They can't preserve that history. It's getting washed away regularly. You would think that place would be uplifted as like a beacon of African American history for the whole country, not just North Carolina. It's sitting in a flood zone. They're still trying to recover from Hurricane Floyd, which how long ago was that, right? Meanwhile, you know, lots of other communities, wealthier communities. There's another thing, these communities didn't have the opportunity to generate wealth. If they didn't have the opportunity to generate wealth, it's harder to be in the history books, right? Because you didn't get the power and the influence to control that narrative. And some of these communities, which are so historically significant, are literally in flood zones, and people are moving away because they just can't afford to live there anymore. So, I mean, it's a reflection that goes very deep. That if originally I just thought, wow, there are ghost towns beneath lakes, that's so cool. And then it's like, oh, wow, when you realize why this history is the way it is, it's not a happy realization, but that's why it's so important to tell it.
All right, Heather, thank you so much for today. It's been such an incredible time for us, and we're just so grateful for your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope to see you at our next History at High Noon, Well Crafted, the history of Western North Carolina furniture industry, taking place here at the museum as well as over Zoom on Wednesday, September 20th at noon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for coming. Sure, thank you.